Imagine being trapped behind enemy lines, surrounded by armed guards, barbed wire, and searchlights that never sleep. Now imagine escaping not by running, not by fighting, but by hiding inside a wooden gymnastics horse while your fellow prisoners carry you closer and closer to freedom. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of one of the most ingenious prison breaks in military history. The wooden horse escape from Stalag Luft Three, a tale of courage, creativity, and the unbreakable human spirit that refused to surrender even in the darkest days of World War II. The year was 1943. The war had been raging across Europe for 4 brutal years. Allied airmen were being shot down over occupied territory at an alarming rate. Those who survived the fall from the sky often found themselves prisoners of the German Luftwaffe, the air force that controlled a network of prison camps specifically designed for captured flyers. These weren't ordinary prisoners. They were educated, trained officers, pilots, navigators, bombardiers, men who had tasted freedom in the skies and now found themselves caged like animals. Among these camps, Stalag Luft Three stood out as particularly escape-proof. Located in Sagan, about 100 miles southeast of Berlin in what was then Germany, and is now Poland, this camp was built with one purpose in mind: to hold prisoners who were considered flight risks. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Flight risks, men whose entire profession involved flying. The Germans had learned from earlier escapes at other camps. They had studied every tunnel, every disguise, every trick the Allies had used. And they built Stalag Luft Three to counter them all. The camp sat on sandy soil. This wasn't an accident. Sand made tunneling incredibly difficult because it collapsed easily and left telltale yellow traces on clothing and skin. The barracks were raised off the ground on stilts, making it nearly impossible to hide a tunnel entrance inside a building. Microphones were buried around the perimeter to detect digging. Guards patrolled constantly. Searchlights swept the compound every night. Roll calls happened multiple times daily to account for every prisoner. Guard towers equipped with machine guns overlooked every inch of the camp. And surrounding it all, 2 parallel barbed wire fences stood 15 feet apart, creating a no-man's land that prisoners called the death zone. Anyone who entered this space would be shot without warning. Inside these fences lived hundreds of Allied airmen. British, American, Canadian, Australian, New Zealand, South African, and others. They came from different countries, different backgrounds, different circumstances. But they shared one thing in common. They refused to accept their captivity as permanent. For these men, escape wasn't just about personal freedom. It was their military duty. The Geneva Convention stated clearly that it was the duty of every prisoner of war to attempt escape. Not only would a successful escape return valuable trained personnel to the Allied war effort, but every escape attempt forced the Germans to divert resources away from the front lines. Guards, dogs, vehicles, fuel, manpower. All of it had to be dedicated to hunting down escaped prisoners instead of fighting Allied soldiers. Among the prisoners at Stalag Luft Three were 3 men who would become legends: Flight Lieutenant Eric Williams, Lieutenant Michael Codner, and Flight Lieutenant Oliver Philpot. Williams was a Royal Air Force pilot who had been shot down over northern Germany. Codner was also RAF, captured after his aircraft went down. Philpot, a Canadian serving in the Royal Air Force, had also fallen from the sky into German hands. These 3 men looked at the supposedly escape-proof camp and saw not an insurmountable obstacle, but a challenge to be solved. The problem was obvious. How do you dig a tunnel when the barracks are raised off the ground? How do you move sandy soil without being caught? How do you dig close enough to the wire to make the tunnel short, but far enough from the barracks to avoid the microphones? Previous escape attempts at other camps had failed because tunnels were too long, too detectable, or took too much time. The Germans had learned to look for fresh dirt, for subtle changes in the compound, for suspicious behavior. Eric Williams was lying on his bunk one day in early 1943 when inspiration struck. He had been watching prisoners exercising in the compound, vaulting over equipment, doing gymnastics to stay fit, and that's when he saw it. The solution hidden in plain sight: a vaulting horse. What if they built a large wooden vaulting horse for gymnastics and placed it in the exercise yard? What if prisoners vaulted over it every day as part of their exercise routine? The Germans would see nothing suspicious. Just men trying to stay healthy. But what if, inside that hollow wooden horse, a man could hide? What if that horse was placed in the same spot every day, carried there by prisoners who appeared to be simply setting up their exercise equipment? And what if, beneath that horse, those hidden men could dig? The brilliance of the plan was its simplicity. Unlike other tunnels that started from barracks far from the fence, this tunnel could begin much closer. The vaulting horse could be positioned in the exercise yard, perhaps only 100 feet from the wire. This meant the tunnel could be relatively short, maybe 120 feet total, short enough to be completed before the Germans caught on. And because the horse would be moved into place every day and removed every evening, there would be no permanent structure for the guards to inspect. No obvious sign that anything unusual was happening. Williams shared his idea with Codner and Philpot. The three men refined the plan over countless whispered conversations in the barracks. They would build a vaulting horse large enough to conceal a man, or even two men inside. Each day, a team of prisoners would carry the horse out to the exercise yard and place it in exactly the same position. They would vault over it, do gymnastics, make a show of exercising. Meanwhile, the men hidden inside would drop down through a trapdoor in the bottom of the horse and begin digging. When the exercise session ended, the diggers would climb back into the horse, replace the trapdoor, and be carried back to the barracks. The tunnel entrance would be carefully concealed beneath a thin layer of sand each day. But ideas are easy. Execution is hard. The first challenge was building the vaulting horse itself. It had to be strong enough to support men vaulting over it repeatedly. It had to be light enough that prisoners could carry it without arousing suspicion. Yet it had to be large enough to hide a man inside. The prisoners scrounged materials from around the camp. Bed boards became the frame. Red Cross packing crates provided additional wood. They used nails pulled from other structures, glue made from boiled bones, and fabric to cover the frame. The result was a vaulting horse that looked entirely legitimate from the outside, but had a hollow interior accessed by a removable panel. The second challenge was the tunnel itself. Digging in sand is nightmarish. Unlike clay or dirt, sand doesn't hold its shape. It collapses constantly. Every shovelful removed creates a small cave-in somewhere else. The diggers would need to shore up the tunnel as they went, using bed boards as supports. But bed boards were precious. The Germans counted them regularly during inspections. Too many missing boards would raise alarms. So the prisoners had to steal boards gradually, hide them, and use them sparingly in the tunnel. The third challenge was disposing of the dirt, or rather, the sand. When you dig a tunnel 120 feet long and 3 feet in diameter, you create an enormous amount of displaced material. Tons of it. And this wasn't dark soil that could blend in with the ground. This was bright yellow sand that stood out dramatically against the gray surfaced dirt of the compound. Hide it poorly, and the Germans would spot it immediately. The guards called it canary yellow. They were trained to look for it. The solution was ingenious. The diggers would bring the sand up in small bags hidden inside the vaulting horse. When the horse was carried back to the barracks, the sand came with it. Then, under cover of darkness or during moments when guards weren't watching closely, prisoners would disperse the sand in small quantities. They scattered it in gardens. They mixed it with ash from the stoves. They even filled their pockets with sand and discreetly emptied them while walking around the compound, letting the sand trickle down their trouser legs. The Germans had a name for these men. They called them penguins because of the waddling walk caused by sand-filled bags tied to their legs beneath their trousers. In April of 1943, the plan moved from theory to action. The vaulting horse was carried out into the exercise yard for the first time. Prisoners gathered around to vault and exercise. Inside, Eric Williams crouched in the darkness. The horse was positioned. Williams heard the muffled sounds of men vaulting overhead. Then he pushed aside the bottom panel and dropped down onto the sandy ground. He began to dig. Those first days were the most dangerous. The tunnel entrance had to be established. Williams dug down about 3 feet to get below the level where the microphones might detect scraping sounds. Then he began digging horizontally toward the fence. The work was exhausting. Cramped in a space barely large enough to move, breathing stale air, Williams scraped away sand with improvised tools. Spoons, pieces of metal, anything that could move dirt. His hands blistered. His back screamed in pain. Sweat poured down his face. And always, overhead, the sound of boots landing on the vaulting horse reminded him that guards could appear at any moment. When the exercise session ended, Williams climbed back into the horse, replaced the trapdoor, and carefully smoothed sand over the entrance. Then his fellow prisoners lifted the horse and carried him back to the barracks. Inside, hidden from view, Williams rode like ancient Greek soldiers hidden in the Trojan horse. The parallel wasn't lost on anyone. History was repeating itself in the most unexpected way. Day after day, the routine continued. The horse was carried out. Men exercised. Diggers dug. Sand was smuggled back and dispersed. Guards watched but saw nothing unusual. Just prisoners staying fit. Just men making the best of captivity. The Germans had no idea that beneath their feet, inch by inch, foot by foot, a tunnel was growing. Michael Codner and Oliver Philpot took turns as diggers. The work rotated because no single man could endure it day after day. The physical toll was immense. Breathing was difficult in the confined tunnel with limited air circulation. The diggers fashioned air pumps from tin cans and tubes, pumping fresh air down into the tunnel. But even with these crude ventilation systems, the air was thick and stifling. Men emerged from digging sessions gasping and dizzy. As the weeks turned to months, the tunnel grew longer. 10 feet, 20 feet, 50 feet. The prisoners reinforced it with bed boards, creating a fragile wooden skeleton that held back tons of sand. They used stolen margarine tins as oil lamps, burning precious fat to provide dim light in the absolute darkness underground. The smell was overwhelming. Sweat, dirt, burning fat, and the ever-present dampness of underground sand. Above ground, the camp continued its normal routine. Roll calls, meals of thin soup and black bread, mail from home that took months to arrive, Red Cross parcels that provided precious supplements to the meager rations. Guards inspected barracks randomly, searching for contraband or signs of escape attempts. The prisoners who knew about the tunnel lived in constant fear that a random inspection would uncover the vaulting horse's secret. But the horse was so well built, so carefully designed, that even close examination revealed nothing. The escape committee, a group of senior prisoners who coordinated all escape attempts in the camp, supported the wooden horse operation. They provided resources, lookouts, diversions when needed. They also prepared the documents and equipment the escapers would need once they broke out. Forged identity papers, civilian clothing, compasses, maps, money. All of this had to be created from scratch using materials smuggled into the camp or repurposed from everyday items. By October of 1943, the tunnel had reached beyond the wire. Measurements suggested they were now outside the camp perimeter, beneath the forest that lay beyond the fences. This was the most critical phase. The diggers had to determine exactly where to break the surface. Too close to the camp, and they would emerge in view of the guard towers. Too far, and they risked the tunnel collapsing before they could complete it. They used careful calculations based on the number of boards they had used and the angle of the tunnel. The decision was made. The escape would happen in late October. 3 men would go: Eric Williams, Michael Codner, and Oliver Philpot. They had earned it through months of backbreaking work. They had designed the plan, built the horse, dug the tunnel. Now they would reap the reward, or die trying. The escape committee prepared everything they would need. Williams and Codner would travel together, posing as French workers. Their forged papers identified them as laborers heading to France. Philpot would travel separately, posing as a Norwegian margarine merchant. His papers were equally convincing, created by expert forgers within the camp who had spent months perfecting their craft. The prisoners dyed uniforms to look like civilian clothes using dyes made from book bindings, boot polish, and other improvised sources. They created briefcases from cardboard and leather scraps. Everything had to look authentic enough to pass casual inspection by German police or railway officials. On the evening of October 28, 1943, everything was ready. That day, the vaulting horse was carried out as usual. Prisoners exercised as usual. But this time, all 3 escapers were hidden inside. Williams, Codner, and Philpot crouched in the cramped interior as they were carried to the exercise yard. When the horse was set down, they dropped through the trapdoor and into the tunnel for the last time. They crawled through the passage they had spent months creating. 120 feet of darkness, supported by stolen bed boards and sheer determination. At the end, they carefully broke through the surface. It was still daylight, too risky to emerge. So they waited in the tunnel, cramped and terrified as the hours crawled by. Above them, the exercise session ended. The vaulting horse was carried back to the barracks, this time truly empty. Other prisoners covered for the missing men at evening roll call, a dangerous deception that bought precious time. As night fell, the 3 men emerged from the tunnel into the forest. They were free. For the first time in months or years, they stood outside the wire, outside the fences, outside the searchlight's reach. But freedom was fragile. They were in the heart of Nazi Germany, hundreds of miles from safety, without food, with limited money, and with the entire German security apparatus about to hunt them. They split up immediately. Philpot headed toward the Baltic coast, hoping to find a Swedish ship. Sweden was neutral. If he could reach it, he would be safe. Williams and Codner headed west, toward France, hoping to make contact with the French resistance. The journey was a nightmare. Every train station was a potential trap. Every policeman a threat. Every fellow traveler could be a Gestapo agent. Williams and Codner traveled by train, using their forged documents to buy tickets. They spoke broken German mixed with French, playing their roles as foreign workers. They slept in railway stations, in bombed-out buildings, anywhere they could find shelter. Hunger gnawed at them constantly. They had some food from Red Cross parcels, carefully hoarded and smuggled out in their clothing, but it wouldn't last long. Philpot faced similar challenges. He traveled north by train, heading for the port cities along the Baltic. His Norwegian cover story was thin, but it held. Germans were used to seeing foreign workers from occupied countries. As long as his papers looked authentic, he could move relatively freely. But the risk of random checks was constant. One wrong answer, one slip of the tongue, and it would all be over. Back at Stalag Luft Three, the Germans discovered the escape during morning roll call on October 29th. 3 men were missing. A frantic search began. Guards tore apart barracks. They searched every building. They inspected the perimeter. And then they found it. The tunnel entrance beneath where the vaulting horse had been placed. The elaborate wooden shoring. The ventilation system. The carefully concealed trapdoor. The Germans were furious. And impressed. Despite themselves, they had to admire the ingenuity. The commandant reportedly said it was the most brilliant escape plan he had ever seen. But admiration didn't stop the manhunt. Alerts went out across Germany. Railway stations were watched. Police were notified. The 3 escapers were now among the most wanted men in the Reich. Williams and Codner made it to the border of occupied France after several harrowing days. They crossed with the help of sympathetic locals and eventually made contact with the French resistance. The resistance moved them through a network of safe houses, always one step ahead of the Germans. From France, they were smuggled into Spain, another neutral country. From Spain, they made their way to Gibraltar, the British fortress on the southern tip of the Iberian Peninsula. From Gibraltar, they finally returned to England. Philpot's journey was equally dramatic. He made it to the Baltic port of Danzig, now Gdansk in Poland. There, he searched desperately for a Swedish ship. The port was heavily guarded. German patrols were everywhere. But Philpot persisted. He watched the ships, looking for any sign of Swedish flags. Finally, he spotted one. A Swedish vessel loading cargo. Approaching the ship was incredibly dangerous. Guards patrolled the docks. But Philpot waited for the right moment and slipped aboard. He hid in the cargo hold as the ship prepared to depart. When they were at sea, away from German waters, he revealed himself to the crew. The Swedish sailors, sympathetic to the Allies, agreed to help him. The ship docked in neutral Sweden, and Philpot was free. From Sweden, he was repatriated to Britain through diplomatic channels. All 3 men made it home. Against incredible odds, through enemy territory, with minimal resources and maximal danger, they succeeded where so many others had failed. The wooden horse escape became legendary within military circles, even before the war ended. When the story became public after the war, it captured the imagination of people around the world. Eric Williams later wrote a book about the escape, titled The Wooden Horse, published in 1949. The book became a bestseller. In 1950, it was adapted into a film of the same name, bringing the story to even wider audiences. The movie dramatized the tension, the ingenuity, and the courage of the escape, cementing its place in popular culture. But what made the wooden horse escape so significant? Why does it still resonate decades later? Part of the answer lies in the sheer creativity of the plan. This wasn't a brute force escape. It didn't rely on overpowering guards or cutting through fences. It was a triumph of intellect over circumstance. The prisoners looked at their situation and found a solution that the Germans, despite all their precautions, never anticipated. The vaulting horse was hidden in plain sight. Every day, German guards watched prisoners exercising. They saw the horse. They saw men vaulting. They saw nothing suspicious because there was nothing suspicious to see on the surface. The deception was so simple, so audacious, that it worked perfectly. This represents a fundamental principle of escape and evasion. The best hiding place is often right in front of your enemy's eyes. The escape also demonstrated the importance of patience and discipline. From conception to execution, the plan took months. Williams and his team didn't rush. They didn't take shortcuts. They methodically built the horse, established the routine, dug the tunnel, and prepared for the escape. This patience was incredibly difficult in the context of a prison camp where every day felt like an eternity. But it was essential to success. Moreover, the wooden horse escape showed the power of teamwork and trust. This wasn't a solo operation. Dozens of prisoners were involved, directly or indirectly. Diggers, lookouts, forgers, tailors who modified clothing, men who dispersed sand, men who covered at roll calls. Every single one of them had to be trusted absolutely. One informer, one mistake, one moment of carelessness could doom the entire operation. The fact that the secret held for months speaks to the incredible bonds formed between prisoners of war. The escape had practical military significance as well. When Williams, Codner, and Philpot returned to England, they brought valuable intelligence about German POW camps, security procedures, and conditions. They also provided a morale boost to the Allied war effort. In 1943, the war was far from won. Stories of courage and successful resistance against the Nazis were precious propaganda that strengthened resolve on the home front. For the prisoners left behind at Stalag Luft Three, the wooden horse escape was both inspiring and costly. Inspiring because it proved escape was possible even from a supposedly escape-proof camp. Costly because the Germans tightened security dramatically after the escape. Guards became more vigilant, inspections more frequent, punishments more severe. Yet this didn't stop the prisoners from planning more escapes. Just months after the wooden horse escape, Stalag Luft Three would become the site of another famous escape attempt. The Great Escape in March of 1944 involved 76 men escaping through an elaborate tunnel system. Unlike the wooden horse, the Great Escape ended tragically. Only 3 men made it to safety. The rest were recaptured, and 50 were executed on Hitler's direct orders in violation of the Geneva Convention. This atrocity shocked the world and became one of the many war crimes for which Nazi leadership was held accountable after the war. The contrast between the wooden horse escape and the Great Escape is instructive. The wooden horse succeeded partly because it was small, focused, and based on a simple deception. The Great Escape was massive, complex, and ultimately too large to keep secret or execute without detection. Both required tremendous courage. Both demonstrated the prisoners' refusal to accept their fate. But the different outcomes remind us that in war, as in life, sometimes less is more. The legacy of the wooden horse escape extends beyond World War II. It has influenced military escape and evasion training ever since. Modern service members who go through survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training, known as SEER, study historical escapes like the wooden horse. The lessons are timeless. Use ingenuity, not just force. Patience beats haste. Simple plans are often better than complex ones. Trust your team absolutely. The story also speaks to something deeper about human nature. Eric Williams, Michael Codner, and Oliver Philpot could have accepted their imprisonment. They could have waited out the war in relative safety. POW camps were harsh, but they were safer than the front lines. Thousands of prisoners chose this path, and there was no shame in it. But Williams and his companions couldn't accept captivity. Something in their spirit demanded freedom, demanded resistance, demanded action. This refusal to surrender, even in the face of overwhelming odds, is a recurring theme in military history. From ancient sieges to modern conflicts, there have always been individuals who refuse to accept defeat, who look at impossible situations and ask not, can this be done? But how can this be done? The wooden horse escape is a perfect example of this mindset. It's worth considering what would have happened if the escape had failed. If the Germans had discovered the tunnel before the 3 men could escape. If they had been caught at a railway station. If their forged papers had been examined more closely. The consequences would have been severe. At minimum, solitary confinement in brutal conditions. At worst, execution. The Nazis were not known for mercy toward escapers. The 50 executions after the Great Escape proved that. So Williams, Codner, and Philpot risked everything for freedom. And they won. Their journey home was just the beginning. All 3 men continued to serve the Allied cause after their return to England. They shared their experiences, helped improve escape training, and contributed to the war effort in various ways. Williams in particular became an advocate for prisoners of war, ensuring that their stories were told and their sacrifices remembered. After the war ended in 1945, the world gradually learned the full extent of what had happened in camps like Stalag Luft Three. The Geneva Convention protections that should have kept prisoners safe had been violated repeatedly by the Nazis. Prisoners had been mistreated, starved, and in some cases murdered. The stories of escapes like the Wooden Horse and the Great Escape became symbols of resistance against tyranny. Stalag Luft Three itself was abandoned as Soviet forces advanced into eastern Germany in early 1945. The prisoners were forced on death marches westward in the middle of winter, enduring terrible hardship. Many died. Those who survived were eventually liberated by Allied forces. Today, the site of Stalag Luft Three is a memorial. Visitors can see the foundations of barracks, the remains of tunnels, and monuments to the men who were imprisoned there. It serves as a reminder of both the horrors of war and the indomitable human spirit. The wooden horse itself, the actual vaulting horse used in the escape, did not survive. It was likely destroyed by the Germans after they discovered its role in the escape. But replicas have been created for museums and memorials. These replicas help modern audiences understand the scale and ingenuity of the plan. When you see a wooden vaulting horse, seemingly innocent exercise equipment, and imagine a man crouched inside being carried over a tunnel entrance, the audacity of the plan becomes clear. In the decades since World War II, the wooden horse escape has been studied by historians, military strategists, and psychologists. Historians analyze it as an example of resistance in extremis. Military strategists study it for lessons about deception and unconventional thinking. Psychologists examine it for insights into resilience, cooperation under stress, and the maintenance of hope in desperate circumstances. One psychological aspect that stands out is how the escape plan gave the prisoners purpose. Life in a POW camp was marked by crushing boredom punctuated by moments of fear. Days blended into weeks, weeks into months. Depression was common. Some prisoners gave up mentally, even if their bodies survived. But those involved in escape attempts had a reason to get up each morning. They had work to do, goals to achieve, a mission to complete. This sense of purpose may have been as valuable to their mental survival as the escape itself. The escape also demonstrated remarkable compartmentalization. The prisoners involved had to maintain normal routines, attend roll calls, interact with guards, all while concealing the tremendous secret of the tunnel. They had to control their excitement, their fear, their anticipation. This required extraordinary emotional discipline. Modern research on stress and performance would suggest that such discipline is both learned and innate. The prisoners of Stalag Luft Three were already disciplined military personnel, but their experience refined that discipline to an exceptional degree. Another aspect worth considering is the German response. After discovering the escape, the Germans could have responded with brutal collective punishment. They could have executed prisoners, reduced rations further, or imposed harsh conditions. While security did tighten, the response was relatively measured, at least initially. This was partly because Stalag Luft Three was run by the Luftwaffe, not the SS. The Luftwaffe generally maintained better standards in their camps, treating prisoners with a degree of respect as fellow military professionals. This would change with the Great Escape, when Hitler personally ordered executions, but in 1943, the wooden horse escapers benefited from this relative professionalism. The technical aspects of the escape are also worth examining. Digging a tunnel through sand without it collapsing requires understanding of basic engineering principles. The prisoners had to calculate angles, create support structures, and solve ventilation problems. Some had engineering backgrounds, but many learned through trial and error. They invented solutions using materials never intended for construction. Bedboards became tunnel supports. Tin cans became air pumps. Margarine became lamp fuel. This adaptability, this ability to repurpose everyday objects for extraordinary purposes, is a hallmark of successful escapes throughout history. The navigation and travel after the escape also required skills the prisoners had to develop or remember. Reading maps, understanding railway schedules, navigating by stars or landmarks, avoiding checkpoints, reading the behavior of people around them to detect threats. These are survival skills, some taught in military training, others learned through experience. Williams, Codner, and Philpot had to recall everything they knew and apply it under the most stressful circumstances imaginable. Language was another challenge. Williams and Codner posed as French workers, but their French had to be good enough to pass casual conversation. Philpot's Norwegian cover required him to remember, or fake enough Norwegian mannerisms and language to be convincing. One detailed conversation with a suspicious German official could have exposed them. They relied on the fact that Germany in 1943 was full of foreign workers from across occupied Europe, and Germans were used to hearing broken German and various accents. But it was still a risk every time they opened their mouths. The forged documents deserve special mention. Creating convincing identity papers, work permits, and travel documents required incredible skill. The forgers in Stalag Luft Three were artists in the truest sense. They studied real documents, memorized layouts, recreated official stamps and seals, and produced forgeries good enough to fool trained officials. They used whatever materials they could find: ink from pencils or pens, paper from books or letters, stamps carved from rubber or linoleum. The fact that these forgeries worked, that Williams, Codner, and Philpot traveled across Germany using fake papers, testifies to the forger's skill. The financial aspect of escape is often overlooked. The escapers needed money to buy train tickets, food, and other necessities. Money in POW camps came from various sources. Some prisoners received small amounts from German authorities. Red Cross parcels sometimes included cigarettes that could be traded. Some money was smuggled in through various means. The escape committee hoarded and distributed these resources carefully, ensuring that escapers had enough to survive, but not so much that discovery of a large cash reserve would raise alarms. Clothing was another critical element. German guards knew what POW uniforms looked like. Escapers in uniform would be immediately identifiable. So prisoners modified uniforms, dyed them, added or removed elements to make them look civilian. They created hats from blankets, coats from dyed uniforms, shoes that looked less military. This transformation happened gradually, piece by piece, to avoid detection during inspections. The result was civilian disguises that could pass quick glances, but might not survive detailed scrutiny. The timing of the escape was carefully chosen. Late October meant longer nights, giving the escapers more darkness to cover their initial movement away from the camp. It was before winter truly set in, avoiding the worst of the cold, but benefiting from seasonal changes that might make guards less attentive. And it came after months of establishing the vaulting horse routine so thoroughly that guards no longer paid close attention to it. Every detail mattered. Communication after the escape was impossible. Williams, Codner, and Philpot had no way to contact each other once they split up. They had no way to send messages back to the camp. Each man was utterly alone, dependent entirely on his own resources and luck. This isolation added to the psychological burden. They couldn't know if their companions had been caught, couldn't know if the alarm had been raised, couldn't know anything except what they directly observed. In an age before cell phones and instant communication, this complete disconnection was normal, but no less terrifying. The help they received along the way, particularly from French resistance and Swedish sailors, highlights the network of resistance against Nazi occupation. Across occupied Europe, thousands of ordinary people risked their lives to help Allied escapers, downed airmen, and others fleeing German control. These resistance networks, while not coordinated centrally, shared information and methods. They hid fugitives, provided forged papers, guided people across borders, and arranged transportation. The risks were enormous. Being caught helping Allied prisoners could result in execution. Yet people did it anyway, motivated by patriotism, hatred of occupation, or simple human decency. When Williams, Codner, and Philpot finally reached safety, their first reports went to military intelligence. Debriefings covered every detail of the escape, the tunnel, the camp layout, German security procedures, guard routines, everything. This information helped plan future operations and prepare other service members for the possibility of capture. Intelligence from escaped POWs was valuable because it came from direct observation of enemy facilities and procedures. The psychological impact of successful escape on other prisoners was significant. Morale in POW camps could be devastatingly low. Men felt forgotten, abandoned, hopeless. But news of successful escapes spread through the camp grapevine, reminding prisoners that freedom was possible, that their captors were not omnipotent, that resistance mattered. Even prisoners who never attempted escape themselves drew strength from knowing that others had tried and succeeded. The wooden horse escape has been compared to other famous escapes throughout history. The Colditz escapes, where Allied officers held in a supposedly escape-proof castle found numerous ways out. The Alcatraz escape, where prisoners disappeared from America's most secure prison. The Berlin Tunnel during the Cold War, where Western intelligence dug beneath the Iron Curtain. Each of these shares common elements with the wooden horse: careful planning, patience, ingenuity, and a refusal to accept the walls around them as permanent. What can modern audiences learn from the wooden horse escape? The most obvious lesson is about creative problem solving. Williams and his team faced a problem that seemed insurmountable. Instead of giving up, they looked at the problem from different angles until they found a solution. This approach applies far beyond prison escapes. In business, in technology, in daily life, we face problems that seem impossible. The wooden horse reminds us to question assumptions, to look for unconventional solutions, to think creatively. Another lesson is about perseverance. Digging that tunnel took months of exhausting, dangerous work. Any day could bring discovery and punishment. But the diggers persisted. They didn't let setbacks stop them. They didn't let fear paralyze them. They kept digging, one handful of sand at a time, until they reached freedom. This persistence in the face of adversity is perhaps the most valuable lesson of all. The escape also teaches about trust and teamwork. No one escapes alone. Williams, Codner, and Philpot depended on dozens of other prisoners who kept their secret, helped with the plan, covered for them. Modern organizations talk about trust and teamwork constantly, but the wooden horse shows these concepts in their purest, most essential form. Lives depended on absolute trust, and that trust was honored. There's also a lesson about preparation. The escape succeeded partly because of meticulous preparation. Forged documents, modified clothing, planned routes, contingencies for various scenarios. Nothing was left to chance as much as possible. While luck played a role, preparation made it possible to capitalize on that luck. As the saying goes, fortune favors the prepared mind. Finally, the wooden horse escape reminds us that freedom is precious. It's easy to take freedom for granted when you've always had it. But for men behind barbed wire, freedom was everything. They were willing to risk torture and death for even a chance at freedom. This perspective should make those of us who live in free societies appreciate what we have and remain vigilant in protecting it. As we conclude this story, it's worth reflecting on where these men ended up. Eric Williams survived the war and lived until 1969. He wrote several books, including his account of the escape. He remained humble about his role, always emphasizing the team effort involved. Michael Codner also survived, living until 2003. He rarely spoke publicly about the escape, preferring privacy. Oliver Philpot survived as well, passing away in 1993. He occasionally gave interviews about the escape, helping keep the memory alive for new generations. The three men reunited several times over the years, attending commemorations and events related to POW history. These reunions were bittersweet, filled with memories of suffering, but also of triumph. They had shared an experience that few could understand, a bond forged in the most extreme circumstances. Their friendship, born in a prison camp and sealed in a daring escape, lasted their entire lives. Today, military historians continue to study the wooden horse escape. It appears in textbooks on military history, in courses on leadership and problem solving, in discussions of World War II. Museums display artifacts and information about the escape. The story has been told and retold in books, films, documentaries, and articles. Each telling reaches new audiences, ensuring that the courage and ingenuity of Williams, Codner, and Philpot are not forgotten. The escape also serves as a reminder of a broader truth about World War II. While history often focuses on the grand sweep of battles and campaigns, the war was also fought on a personal level by millions of individuals making choices in terrible circumstances. Prisoners choosing to resist rather than submit. Resistance fighters choosing to help despite mortal danger. Ordinary people making extraordinary decisions. The wooden horse escape is one story among millions, but it encapsulates the spirit of resistance that ultimately contributed to Allied victory. In closing, the wooden horse escape stands as one of the most remarkable achievements in military escape history. It succeeded where others failed because it combined creativity, patience, teamwork, and courage in equal measure. Three men hidden inside a gymnastics vaulting horse, digging their way to freedom one handful of sand at a time, refusing to let barbed wire and machine guns define the limits of their world. Their story continues to inspire because it speaks to something fundamental in the human spirit: the desire for freedom, the refusal to surrender, the determination to find a way forward no matter how impossible the path may seem. This is the legacy of the wooden horse escape, and this is why more than 80 years later, we still tell their story.